We would see Sean Dugas at scenes of usually violent crimes.
So what made Shawn's friends so concerned that he hadn't made lunch?
Just picking up and disappearing was not like him. Maybe it was something associated with his work as a reporter. Like maybe he had run afoul of someone in a story that he was working on.
He had gotten into some kind of a major fight,
which led to him being punched in the face. There was always the possibility that they might be responsible for his disappearance. His game of choice was Magic the Gathering. Apparently he had a very large collection worth well over $100,000.
So did you believe that the collection could have had something to do with his disappearance?
Obviously, that was a possibility.
And what did they discover in his backyard?
It wasn't a dog, it was a human being buried within a tub. I don't know where Shawn would have gone to next with his career in journalism. You know, he may have had big ambitions and all that was cut short.
Hi, I'm Nancy O'Dell. Today's Crime Exposé takes us to Pensacola, Florida. This popular tourist destination became the backdrop for a disturbing mystery when 33-year-old Sean Dugas vanished into thin air. As detectives followed the mysterious trail of his last known steps, it would leave his loved ones devastated when the awful truth was revealed. It was a warm fall morning when a concerned father called police and said his 33-year-old son, Sean Dugas, was missing. He explained one of Sean's close friends became worried when Shawn failed to show up for lunch.
She had arranged to have lunch with him. When she went to go pick him up, he wasn't there.
So what made Shawn's friends so concerned that he hadn't made lunch?
The house was empty. This was totally outside the norm for Shawn, who was responsible. He was a local reporter, worked for the newspaper, but he was usually involved in these other people's lives, and him just picking up and disappearing was not like him. It was out of his character. He was a longtime Pensacola resident, that in the next town over, Gulf Breeze. So he was from the area, he had family in the area, and for him just to pack up and move was very unusual. So that was the thing that really set off the alarms, is that the house is empty. He hadn't indicated to his family and friends as to where he was going.
Shawn was known as a hardworking and tenacious reporter for the Pensacola News and Journal.
Yeah, we would see Sean Dugas at scenes of usually violent crimes or homicide cases where the media had an interest in covering, you know, what had happened in that particular incident, whether it be a murder or something serious like that. And sometimes he would be kind of the crime reporter that would be sent to the scene.
He worked the crime beat, which is how we met him. I think the first time that I had a conversation with Shawn was actually about 2.5 years before, at another homicide case where he showed up to do some initial reporting, and he was kind of like a pushy sort of report, like he was trying to get past the crime scene tape. He was asking for statements from detectives and officers as they were leaving the scene, and you know, he was kind of irritating. So that was our experience with him, was in him trying to get the scoop on stories and showing up at murder scenes and hot crime scenes to try and find out information for his writing.
Detectives wondered if his work covering homicides had somehow led to his disappearance.
Maybe it was something associated with his work as a reporter. Like maybe he had run afoul of someone in a story that he was working on.
But interviews with Shawn's co-workers convinced them the lead was a dead end.
There was no evidence we could develop based upon some sort of disgruntled focus of a story. There was nothing that came to light in regards to that.
Detectives quickly learned that shortly before his disappearance, Shawn had been to the emergency room.
He had gone out to the beach here locally in Pensacola and had gotten into some kind of a major fight and gotten beaten up.
And the story that I got in regards to that fight was he had been out drinking at the beach with some friends. They had an argument, some things were said. Apparently, Shawn may have said some things that upset some of the friends that he was with, which led to him being punched in the face. He had his jaw broken, so his jaw was wired shut. He had a medical plate that was repairing the jaw, and so he was having problems with the pain medication and various things in his life.
After the attack, Shawn had decided to press charges.
He had prosecuted the suspects. There had been arrests.
Investigators theorized his assailants had attacked him again, and an explosive argument had turned deadly.
There was always the possibility that it was extended and that something else had happened from that group of people, and they might be responsible for his disappearance.
Law enforcement took a close look at the subjects involved.
We didn't find any recent contact between him nor any of the persons involved in the fight. No threads were developed that led from his disappearance to anything that happened after that fight.
The clues left behind at his home showed he had been gone for at least 2 weeks.
Mail was piling up in the mailbox.
The lawn is looking out of control.
It was very unusual. Shawn's car was no longer there at the house.
A be on the lookout was issued, and his car was quickly located in the Pensacola airport parking lot, which put another possibility back on the table.
This was just a missing persons case. We can pack up and leave as another possibility. So there was nothing that was keeping him from that, but it was the behaviors that had led up to his disappearance that were unusual. Here's Shawn that has this excessive collection of cards that are very valuable. I am now very concerned about what may have happened with Shawn.
"33-year-old Sean Dugas was nowhere to be found, and his mysterious disappearance baffled investigators.
There was a couple different things that could have happened. One is that he left and just moved away and no one knew where he had gone. The other possibility is worst case where there's foul play and he's now deceased.
Law enforcement discovered when Shawn wasn't at work, he was with his friends at the local comic store.
There was a comic book shop that he did a lot of gaming at. His game of choice was Magic the Gathering. Apparently he had a very large collection. And so a lot of his friendships and interactions took place at this local comic shop.
Red flags were raised when police discovered Shawn owned an incredibly valuable card collection.
So in talking to a few of his friends, his ex-girlfriend who worked at the comic book shop, they all explained that Shawn had an extensive Magic the Gathering collection worth well over $100,000. He had some very rare cards, and he invested a lot of time and energy into this game, a lot of money into this game.
So did anybody know that he owned such a valuable collection?
Well, it was pretty shocking that he had a collection that was worth that much.
So did you believe that the collection could have had something to do with his disappearance?
I would say that obviously that was a possibility, that because of the assets that he had and the value of his collection, that could have been a target.
While forensic examiners combed through Shawn's home for any evidence of foul play, detectives located a neighbor who gave them troubling information.
A neighbor had indicated that a couple of his friends had a U-Haul at the house, and they were loading Shawn's belongings into a U-Haul.
I mean, as I remember it, they were loading up just normal house stuff, possessions, small furniture items, things like that. It's that kind of stuff you'd expect to see being loaded if you're moving.
The neighbor said this had happened just days before Shawn was reported missing, which brought up more questions than answers.
Our focus initially was try and discover who would have rented the U-Haul, where the U-Haul would have ended up, and who these two guys were and what their story was about where Shawn would have gone.
Detectives focused their efforts on finding that U-Haul truck.
I went to the local U-Haul dealership and tried to find out if Shawn had rented a U-Haul truck. The person at the counter was actually not very cooperative at all, seemed irritated with us asking and advised us that we would have to get a subpoena, which wasn't necessarily unusual. So I went back to the police station and prepared a subpoena. The issue with that is that sometimes getting the results from a subpoena can take weeks. So we would have preferred to have gotten that information that day. it was just going to take some time. So we did a subpoena, issued it to U-Haul, and what we were trying to capture was any U-Haul rentals in Shawn's name. So we entered the subpoena request with a window of time. It was about a month's window, which would have covered the day of disappearance and the date that the U-Haul was seen until present. We knew that if we had information about this U-Haul, we can isolate the actual rental. We could actually see what was returned, which would tell us possibly where Shawn may have gone.
The U-Haul records and surveillance video provided police with a lead.
It was a 14-foot truck that was rented on or about the day that it was seen at the house, and it was returned to the same location in Pensacola.
So who was it that rented the U-Haul truck?
It was rented by Will Cormier.
Detectives learned 31-year-old Will Cormier had a twin brother named Chris, and they lived in Winder, Georgia, over 300 miles away from Pensacola. The twins had been close friends with Shawn and had met because of their shared love of the card game Magic: The Gathering.
Shawn had been friends with the brothers for several years. The Cormiers had deep associations in Pensacola. Their father had lived there, so at some point they kind of grown up here. Their bonding over this game is what led to their friendship.
The brothers would often visit Shawn at his home.
When they would come back to Pensacola, they would quite often stay with Shawn.
Investigators dialed the number on Will Cormier's U-Haul rental agreement.
The phone was disconnected, so that didn't work.
But records also showed Will Cormier had rented another U-Haul a week later, as well as a tow dolly, which was paid for by his father.
And it had a phone number for Will's father, and it used Will's father's credit card, Bill Cormier. So now we're armed with a phone number that potentially works.
Detectives immediately called Bill Cormier, who lived in Winder, Georgia.
So when I spoke with Bill, I indicated that I was looking for his twin sons, Will and Chris. He told me that he hadn't seen them in over 5 months, and they weren't there. And so I explained that I was looking for a friend of theirs named Shawn. He indicated to me then that Shawn wasn't with them.
But the next call law enforcement would get would break the case wide open.
There was what he called the smell of death.
The father, I think he kind of put two and two together, ended up calling back and telling Sergeant Harnett that, he was concerned that maybe that wasn't really a dog that was buried.
Detectives searching for 33-year-old Sean Dugas believe Will and Chris Cormier had something to do with his disappearance. It was then forensic examiners notified police they'd found evidence of foul play inside Shawn's home.
Well, we actually ended up finding blood.
Crime scene technicians had found droplets of cleaned up blood all over Sean Dugas' home. Moments later, the father of the Cormier twins, Bill Cormier, called police, and what he revealed was a bombshell. He said he had lied to them when he claimed he didn't know anything about his son's whereabouts. In fact, the week before, the twins had pulled into his driveway in a U-Haul, and their explanation for why they were there was strange and incredibly disturbing.
His sons had arrived at the house with this U-Haul filled with these belongings, and they explained that they belonged to a friend of his, Shawn, and that they were helping him move, and Shawn had a dog, and the dog had died, and so they were going to bury this dog in the backyard.
And there was more.
When they arrived at his house in Georgia, this is weeks after Shawn has disappeared. So there was what he called the smell of death coming from this U-Haul.
He was concerned that maybe that wasn't really a dog that was buried.
Law enforcement immediately raced to Bill Cormier's backyard. And what did they discover in his backyard?
It wasn't a dog, it was a human being buried within a tub, a large plastic storage tub, and then a large number of different types of air fresheners.
Dental records proved what investigators already knew. The victim was Sean Dugas. The medical examiner told a grim story of his last moments alive.
There was numerous marks on the skull, over a dozen strikes that we found, and there was parts of the skull that were actually caved in using a hammer. So we knew from the edges of the wound on the skull, that a hammer was very likely the weapon that was used.
As detectives fanned out to bring the Cormier brothers into custody, they searched for more evidence to build a case against them.
We have a Walmart store that was here in Pensacola. It's not far from where Sean Dugas lived at the time that he was murdered. Sure enough, they had a tub there that was exactly the type that Sean's body was found in.
Detectives pulled security footage of the last time the container had been purchased.
It's clearly William Cormier that's buying the tub. You see him pull one off the shelf, lay it on the ground, and he even steps back and kind of looks at it like he wanted to see just how large it was. He's almost sizing it up. Is this going to fit Sean Dugas' body? And then he eventually decides it will, and he buys it. And he buys not only that, but he buys a tarp, and he buys a whole bunch of air fresheners.
Armed with the evidence against them, the brothers were brought into separate interrogation rooms. After hours of questioning, Chris Cormier agreed to talk. So what did he tell you that happened on the night of Sean's murder?
He hears his brother, Will, and Shawn kind of arguing in the next room. And then he hears Shawn yell, "You cut me." He sees Will strike Shawn in the back of the head with the hammer as hard as he could, and Shawn collapses and dies in the garage.
He said Will had committed the crime so he could steal Sean's valuable collection of magic cards. Did you find any evidence they had sold the cards after Sean's murder?
We determined that they had sold somewhere in the neighborhood of about $30,000 worth of cards.
The search to find the missing reporter who had covered so many of the detectives' other heartbreaking cases was now over.
This was probably the first homicide case that I had where I actually knew the victim. There was a matter of relief and then shock around the fact that I knew this guy.
Sean Dugas was a true innocent victim. He didn't do anything to deserve what happened to him. He was young. He had a career going. I don't know where Shawn would have gone to next with his career in journalism, and he may have had big ambitions, and all that was cut short.
After less than 2 hours of deliberation, a jury found Will Cormier guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His twin brother Chris pled no contest to charges of helping his brother move Sean Dugas' body. He was sentenced to 15 years behind bars. And now it is time for today's Safety Spotlight. While no safety measures are foolproof, experts recommend you limit who you discuss your finances or valuables with, as it may make you a target for criminals. To protect high-value items, secure them in a home safe or safety deposit box to prevent robbers' access to them. And if you must keep these items in your home, make sure your residence is outfitted with a security alarm and cameras to deter thieves. And finally, if you are confronted by a robber, safety experts generally advise you to give them what they want to avoid a struggle that could result in violence or death. Your life and your safety are your greatest assets. I'm Nancy O'Dell. For all of us here at Crime Exposé, please join us next time and stay safe.